All right, we are going to pick up with our video lecture from yesterday. So I just thought I would deliver it this way to make sure everybody's kind of on the same page and ready for our lesson on Wednesday. So when we last left off, we were talking about the causes for World War II. And I was talking about these generalized causes, not the reasons why the U.S. joins the war, but like these other reasons, the larger reasons why the war breaks out. And we had talked that the first cause was the Treaty of Versailles, and the second cause is these aggressive nations. And so I was talking a bit about Japan and how Japan had invaded into China, and that's where we left off. I want to use, this next example by looking at Italy and the ways in which Italy is being aggressive. I think it's important worth noting that Italy decides in 1935 to exit the League of Nations. They had begun expanding into other areas, and as you can see on my timeline here, they've invaded and conquered Ethiopia by 1935. The League of Nations actually condemns their actions, and Italy just basically is like, peace out, I'm heading out then, which I think has some broader implications, as we'll talk about. So with that said, right, Italy has completely broken some of the rules of both the Washington Naval Conference and of the Treaty of Versailles. In doing so, right, they've been pretty aggressive. And then in 1939, they decide to invade and conquer Albania. And we move next to Germany. As we have kind of examined the reasons why the Treaty of Versailles, or the kind of hand that the Treaty of Versailles dealt Germany, what we start to see happen in the 1930s is this nationalistic movement emerging in Germany. And there's this desire to regain land that was lost under the treaty. And such land includes, as you can see here, the Rhineland, and that's this area that is hashed right here. Shared border between Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, and France. Germany was not supposed to be in that as part of the Treaty of Versailles. It was kind of like a no man's zone, and the idea was that having Germany there really made France nervous, and so they weren't supposed to be there. And Germany decides in 1936 to just violate those rules anyway, and annexes it, and puts military actually in the Rhineland. In 1938, it decides to invade Austria and also take this part of land called the Sudetenland. And the Sudetenland, much like the Rhineland, is historically German. And so, and it's now in another part, a new country, right? Czechoslovakia is a new country. And as I briefly mentioned yesterday, to Germany, they look like they're just taking land that they believe is rightfully theirs. And yeah, of course, it's not theirs. It's Czechoslovakian land, but nonetheless, Germany takes that land. And we're going to talk more about kind of the consequences for that shortly. 1939, they invade Czechoslovakia in full force. And then on September 1st, 1939, they roll into Poland. Within 3 weeks, Poland falls, and much of that is due in place to the type of method of warfare that Germany chooses to use, which is called blitzkrieg or lightning war. It's kind of a full-sail assault attack on a country with like all military forces. So Germany uses blitzkrieg and takes Poland, and Poland falls within 3 weeks. That causes Britain and France to decide to declare war. So for much of Europe, the late 1930s is a story of war. The United States is kind of in a different place at that point in time. In 1940, Germany invades and conquers, as you can see, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. I would argue that those are pretty aggressive actions. So if we look at cause 3, the lack of accountability for aggressive actions. In 1938, when Hitler invades the Sudetenland, you might expect that there would be a call out for sort of this behavior, like an outcry for what Germany's done, because of course they're like invading another country and taking land. And in fact, there is a little bit of like, hey, you can't do that. And the hey is Great Britain and France. They pull together and ask to meet with Hitler. They do meet with Hitler in a meeting, and nonetheless, the result is basically what we call appeasement. And you can see here on my notes that the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain proposes that Hitler can keep the land if he promises not to invade anywhere else. And again, we call that appeasement. This is a great term. I think it's on your term list. It's when we give something to someone in order to maintain peace. So appeasement might be if you're throwing a fit in the grocery store and you want candy and you're crying out about how much you want candy. If your parent just gives you a candy, they're basically giving you this thing to make peace, to like shut you up. But of course, as you can imagine, and as we've just talked about on this timeline, giving Hitler the Sudetenland really doesn't appease him in the long run because he just turns around and decides to invade other places. But I think we could argue that like the fact that they're really just not holding Germany accountable is incredibly important. I think we have to ask ourselves, well, isn't that the job of the League of Nations? Don't they hold people accountable? Well, absolutely. They attempt to. They object to the actions of Italy. And you know what? Italy is like, cool, peace out, right? They don't really care. And I think that tells you something about the nature of the League of Nations, right? If this is an organization which is supposed to be able to hold people accountable, then they're not doing that job very well. As we looked at these aggressor nations, right, Japan's invade Manchuria, the League just issues the stern warning. Germany, annexes the Rhineland. Well, it's a total violation of the Treaty of Versailles, but oh well. In 1938, right, there's an invasion and conquering of Austria and Sudetenland. Well, land is surrendered. And in 1939, finally, right, Britain and France declare war upon the action of the invasion of Czechoslovakia and Poland. I think when we come back and we look at these sort of big overarching causes, right, we know that the Treaty of Versailles creates a lot of problems for Germany, and it causes them to kind of feel backed into a corner. We know that there's this huge aggressive actions that are taking place by totalitarian and fascist dictators, such as Emperor Hirohito, such as Benito Mussolini, such as Adolf Hitler. And they're just invading countries at will because they feel like they can. And lastly, there's just really a lack of serious response to this aggression. There's appeasement, there's objections without actions, but ultimately nothing is really done. So we're going to leave on that note. You have a reading that's coming up next to help reinforce sort of the American perspective on things.